Hey everybody, happy Halloween! Today I will be finishing the Shoebox Roombox and show you how to make this little armchair along with a few other things. And don't forget to check the link in the description. That'll take you to my Patreon where you will find the list of materials and also a free printable pattern for the chair. Speaking of the pattern, it has a little bit of a assembly guide on there, so I'm going to start with all of my pieces taped together. No need for glue just yet, but you do need to grab your foam that you've picked out. Trace your chair pattern onto the foam and cut it out. I beveled the edges of mine to kind of give it a little bit of a softer edge because I'm using a little bit harder of a foam. I also cut two rectangle pieces for the sides of the arms. Next, you'll need to grab your swatches of fabric that you're wanting to use. I thought mine was kind of fitting because I salvaged it from the underneath side of a kitchen chair. Once you have your fabric and foam ready, you can upholster your cushions by wrapping them almost like you would a present. I use super glue to do mine, but honestly, that would be up to you and the type of fabric that you use. And yes, I did check and make sure I didn't have a chemical reaction before I used it this time. Now we're going to upholster the actual chair piece, leaving a gap at both the top and bottom end. Lay the back of the chair on the fabric. Trace the sides. Then without moving it around too much, tip your chair forward and trace the bottom sides. Cut it out and set it aside. Before we add the fabric, we have to finish putting the foam on the chair. The only pieces we're going to put on are on the outside of the arm, and this gives it a rounded shape in the end. You won't be able to tell that it's rectangle-y. We had to put the arms on first to make sure that we had enough fabric to wrap all the way around the chair. For me, that was a 2 by 8 inch strip, and I used Aleene's for this. The super glue would leave a spot and you'd be able to tell where it was glued. Start with the bottom of the chair first and set it centered on your fabric. Then work your way up the sides. When you are going up over the arm, that's where you can adjust the curvature for the underneath side of the arm. If you want a crisper edge right there, you can use a clamp to hold it there until it dries. Your fabric should reach all the way to the inside bottom of the chair. Cut the excess from both the front and back, and we're going to move on to gluing the inside cover that we cut up earlier. For this, you don't have to wrap too far around. We just need it to make sure that it goes over the top and bottom edges so it makes it look nice and clean. Okay, for the next piece of fabric, if you want to just leave your chair fabric and not put clay over it, then I would suggest folding over the edges before you glue them down. If you are putting clay over it, then you glue the back of the chair to the fabric and then cut as close as you can to the edge. Let it dry completely, and then we're going to move on to attaching the bones. My chair came out top heavy for a few different reasons. One, I didn't bend the feet far enough. I used the Dollar Tree skeletons and a human squishy body thing. Also, the squishy guy, his chest is a very hard, sturdy plastic, and it weighed more than the chair, really. And that is another contributing factor. I believe they had a few larger skeletons that probably had a much thinner chest and would work a lot better than what this did. So I would suggest that. For the arms, I used a blow dryer and a lighter to bend the hands at the wrist to make them look like they were wrapped around the arm of the chair. When I did the pre-measurements to make the chair to fit inside of the rib cage, I was surprised at how well it actually fit in there. I'm using super glue and baking soda to hold these pieces together. Because they're different types of materials and plastic isn't very porous, it's the best way to get a grip. And if you are still having problems, you can sand a little bit on your plastic and that'll give it the glue something to stick to. I used four Dollar Tree skeleton feet as feet for the chair. They have an awkward angle to them. They don't sit at right angles. I tried to use the blow dryer to get them bent right, but it still seemed to go back to that awkward shape. When I get to the clay part, I even tried putting a penny on the front bottom side of the chair to try to even it out, and it still fell over. So in the end, I glued everything in the shoebox down. Speaking of clay, that's what we're going to start on next. Now, I did try, and that's what I have recorded, is me using cold porcelain clay. I was hoping to use this clay's downfall as a plus side for this project. The clay has a tendency to shrink, and if it's thin enough, it will split apart. And I was hoping that the seams that I was cutting into it would split open a little bit. However, they split open too far, and I had to peel all the clay off and redo it. I wouldn't suggest it for this type of project. That led me to finding this stuff. I had never used it before and thought that I'd give it a try. I didn't do a whole lot of research on it. It was kind of like a open it up and play with it kind of thing. One of the things that I noticed right away was one, it smelled like paint. It wasn't overwhelming, and it feels like paper pulp but leaves a white residue like drywall mud. And when I was rolling it out, I noticed that it was clumpy almost. But once I had it rolled out, it wasn't like that anymore. Even when I put it onto the chair and started smoothing the edges, it wasn't clumpy either. As for the techniques of getting the clay on the chair, I did it the same with both types of clay. And I rolled out thin sheets and laid it over top of it and used my round purple and white volley tool to get into the creases of the cushions of the chair. If you want to make a deeper seam, you can use a pointier tool. You just have to be careful that you're not going to cut all the way through. For the arms, I brought the clay right up to the bones and left it just right there. I didn't go over them at all. And for the feet, I tried to come down on the ankles with the clay just a little bit. Smoothing the edges down for the cold porcelain clay, I used glue, which works really well. For the other type of clay, you just need to use water and smooth them that way. To make the stool, I followed the same process that I did with the chair with the foam and the fabric. For the legs, I used hands instead of feet. I used my lighter to get the plastic soft enough to bend. Make sure you're in a well ventilated area if you're going to use a lighter. You can also use a blow dryer or a heat gun, but I would suggest leaving them attached to the arm until after you got them bent. I also covered the stool the same way that I did the chair, so I'm not going to go into detail on that. With the chair and stool covered, I could turn my attention to the lamp. To start, I picked a big, heavy green button and a leg. I sanded the knee to give me a better surface and an arm at the elbow. Then I bent the hand to where it would sit flat and hold a tray. Next, I glued the foot to the base. Then I found me a big black button and glued it to the hand. It still wasn't quite tall enough, so I grabbed another skeleton and borrowed his arm from the elbow down. But I don't think he'll mind too much. I'm already using his other arm and leg. I did get his fingers in the shape to where his pointer finger was pointing up, so it looks like the lampshade is sitting on his finger. But because I used the clay to hold the lamp shade onto the hand, you can't tell that I did it. Then I glued the hip to the elbow. I sat it aside and grabbed the gooey parts from the squishy human body and stuck inside one of the skeletons to give it guts. I also stuck some lungs and a little bit of the heart in there, but you can't tell in the end. Once I had them where I wanted them, I glued them down with super glue. Now we're ready to give him skin. Once the lamp and body were dry, I went ahead onto coloring. I chose to go with markers because I like the control that I have with them over paint. I used different shades of brown and started with the darkest colors first, underneath the rib line and down in the creases of the cushions. To finish these pieces off, I need to add in the laces. I use simple thread, super glue, patience, and a pointy tool. This took a little longer than expected, but I really liked how it turned out in the end. Using the holes that I poked as inlet holes for the string, I went back and forth in a crisscross manner. I skipped every other one like you would lace up a shoe and held it there until it dried, but while holding it there, I had to cross for the next hole before the string got too stiff and I wouldn't be able to bend it. I had done the laces before I did collaring, so you would be able to see what I was doing without the collar and making it muddy. Speaking of muddy, the last thing I had to do was give it goo. For the body and the soft parts, because I didn't know how they would react to resin, I have a little container with clear Elmer's glue and food coloring. I wanted to make sure that I gave a good coating over the organs so that way when or if I did put resin over it, it wouldn't affect it. At least that was my thought, kind of like a primer. Just for the body though. I know that glue like this would not stick very well to the aluminum, so when I was done covering the body with the Elmer's glue, I mixed up the jeweler's gooey resin and used that for the mat. Though I didn't expect it to come out green, I wanted a brown color like I had with the glue, but it came out green, so I just went with it. A little too much, actually. I had to get a paper towel and wipe a good bit of it off and take away the brush strokes. If you've made it this far, thank you for being here. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as it really helps me out a lot. Thank you so much, Ginger, and I'll see you next time.